Have you ever made a mistake so expensive it cost you your soul? Richard Sterling thought he had it all: the flashy car, the young mistress, and the freedom from his boring wife, Soraya. He walked into Le Bernardin that night, expecting a victory lap. Instead, he walked into his own funeral. He didn't just see his ex-wife, he saw her destroying his ego without saying a word. And when the man sitting across from her, a man worth more than Richard's entire bloodline, dropped to one knee, Richard realized too late. He hadn't thrown away trash. He had thrown away a diamond. This is the story of how regret tastes when it's served cold. The rain in Manhattan wasn't just rain. It was a curtain of grey silk draping over the city, making the lights of Midtown shimmer like spilled gold. For Richard Sterling, watching the droplets race down the tinted window of his Mercedes S-Class, the weather was just another backdrop to his success. He adjusted the cuffs of his Brioni suit, glancing at the woman beside him. Tiffany was 24, a vision of carefully constructed beauty. Her blonde hair was a cascade of salon-perfect waves. Her lips glossed in a shade of pink that Richard was fairly certain cost more than his first car. She was scrolling through Instagram, the blue light illuminating her surgically enhanced cheekbones. "Rick, baby, are we almost there?" Tiffany whined, not looking up from her phone. "My battery is at like 12%, and I need to post a story at dinner. You said this place has good lighting, right?" "The best, Tiff." "The best," Richard said, a tight smile playing on his lips. He reached over and patted her knee, his hand lingering on the smooth skin. "It's Le Bernardin. 3 Michelin stars. It's not about the lighting. It's about the status. But yes, you'll look beautiful." He felt a surge of pride, but it was a shallow, brittle kind of pride. 6 months. That's how long it had been since the divorce was finalized. 6 months since he had looked Soraya in the eye. His wife of 15 years, the mother of his non-existent children, something they had fought about constantly, and told her he was suffocating. He hadn't been suffocating. He had been bored. Soraya was dependable. She was warm. She made excellent pot roasts and balanced their checkbook with the precision of a forensic accountant. But Soraya wore cardigans. Soraya preferred quiet nights in, with a book over galas. Soraya had started to get fine lines around her eyes that Richard found himself staring at with growing resentment. He wanted excitement. He wanted Tiffany, who was an influencer with 50,000 followers and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes, loud, attention-grabbing wind chimes. "I just hope we don't run into anyone boring," Tiffany sighed, finally dropping the phone into her tiny Chanel clutch. "Last week, your business partner, Greg, wouldn't shut up about his golf swing. I almost died." "Greg is essential to the merger, Tiffany. Bear with it," Richard snapped, then softened his tone. "Tonight is just us. A celebration. The Sterling-Vaughan deal closed today. I'm officially in the big leagues." The car pulled up to the curb. The valet, a young man who looked like he knew exactly how much Richard's watch, a Patek Philippe Nautilus, was worth, opened the door. Richard stepped out, inhaling the scent of wet pavement and expensive perfume. He felt like a king. He had shed the dead weight of his past. He had the trophy girl. He had the money. They entered the restaurant, the hush of extreme wealth enveloping them. The maître d', a man named Henri, who had known Richard for years, stiffened slightly when he saw Tiffany. "Mr. Sterling," Henry said, his French accent clipped. "Table for 2? "The usual, Henry." "By the window," Richard said, slipping a $100 bill into the man's hand. "I am afraid the window tables are fully committed tonight, monsieur," Henri said, the money disappearing into his pocket without a glance. "However, we have a lovely banquette near the center." Richard frowned. "Committed?" I'm a regular. Who's sitting there? A private party, monsieur. Very high profile. Tiffany tugged on Richard's arm. Rick, I don't care where we sit. Just get me a drink. I'm parched. Richard swallowed his irritation. Fine. The banquet. As they were led through the dining room, Richard scanned the crowd. It was the usual mix of Wall Street titans, old money matriarchs, and visiting royalty. He puffed his chest out. He belonged here. They sat. Tiffany immediately ordered a bottle of Cristal, not bothering to look at the price. Richard watched her, a sudden, unbidden memory flashing in his mind. Soraya sitting across from him at a diner on their 10th anniversary because money was tight that year. She was eating a burger, laughing so hard milkshake came out of her nose. She had looked at him with such adoration, such complete, unfiltered love, that it had scared him. Rick? Hello? Earth to Rick? Tiffany was waving a manicured hand in his face. I said, do you think I should get the lobster or the Wagyu? Get both, Richard said, shaking off the memory. Get whatever you want. He took a sip of water, his eyes drifting over Tiffany's shoulder toward the window tables, the prime real estate he had been denied. The tables had been pushed together to form a semi-private dining area, shielded by a tasteful arrangement of orchids. A man was sitting there, his back to Richard. He was wearing a suit that Richard recognized immediately as bespoke, Savile Row. No wrinkles, perfect drape. The man's posture was relaxed but commanding. Opposite the man, a woman was seated. Her back was also partially turned to the room, but Richard could see the curve of her neck, the elegant sweep of an emerald green evening gown that left her shoulders bare. Her hair was a rich, glossy chestnut, pinned up in a loose, sophisticated chignon. She laughed. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a knife. It was a throaty, genuine laugh. It wasn't the wind chime titter of Tiffany. It was rich, like dark chocolate. Richard froze. He knew that laugh. He had heard that laugh for 15 years, usually while watching sitcoms or playing Scrabble. But it sounded different here. It sounded expensive. What are you looking at? Tiffany asked, turning her head. Nothing, Richard muttered, his heart hammering a strange rhythm against his ribs. Just, I think I know someone over there. Who? Is it a celebrity? Tiffany perked up. No, Richard said, squinting. The woman turned slightly to thank the waiter, and the soft, ambient light caught her profile. Richard dropped his fork. It clattered against the fine china, a harsh sound that drew a few glares from nearby tables. It wasn't possible. The woman in the emerald gown, the woman radiating an aura of grace and power that made Tiffany look like a child playing dress-up, was Soraya. His Soraya. The woman who wore cardigans and clipped coupons. But this Soraya was wearing a diamond necklace that Richard estimated was worth more than the house he had fought her for in the divorce settlements. Rick, you're being weird, Tiffany snapped. Pick up your fork. It's Soraya, he whispered. Who? My ex-wife. Tiffany let out a cruel little snort. The frumpy one? Please. That woman over there looks like a Bond girl. You need glasses, babe. Richard stared. Tiffany was right. It couldn't be Soraya. Soraya didn't own a dress like that. Soraya didn't sit at the prime table at Le Bernardin with men who wore Savile Row suits. Soraya was supposed to be in her small apartment in Queens, crying over old photo albums and struggling to pay the electric bill. That was the narrative Richard had built to justify his betrayal. I did her a favor. She couldn't keep up with me. But as the woman turned further to accept a glass of wine, the light hit her face fully. The fine lines were there, yes, But they weren't signs of age anymore. They were accents to a stunning, mature beauty. Her skin glowed, her eyes were bright. She looked happy, and she was looking right at the man across from her, with a look Richard hadn't seen in years. "It's her," Richard said, his voice hardening. "What is she doing here?" Soraya Jenkins, she had dropped the sterling the day the papers were signed, took a sip of the vintage Pinot Noir. It tasted of blackberries and earth, complex and grounding. "You're smiling," the man across from her said. His voice was a deep baritone, the kind of voice that made you want to lean in just to catch the vibrations. "I am," Soraya admitted, placing the glass down. "I was just thinking about how terrified I was to come here tonight." Sebastian Pierce smiled. It was a rare expression for a man known in the business world as the Shark of Silicon Valley. Sebastian didn't just own tech companies, he owned the infrastructure that allowed them to exist. He was 48, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that were fiercely intelligent. "Terrified? You?" Sebastian raised an eyebrow. "Soraya, you faced down the board of directors at Orion Logistics last week without blinking. I don't believe you're terrified of a little French food." "It's not the food, Sebastian," she said softly. "It's the visibility. For 15 years I was invisible. I was the background noise in someone else's life. Being here, front and center, wearing this dress, it feels like I'm an imposter." Sebastian reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was warm and solid. "You are not an imposter. You are the reason Orion didn't go under. You are the most brilliant logistical mind I have ever met. And," his voice dropped an octave, "you are the most beautiful woman in this room by a wide margin." Soraya felt a blush rise to her cheeks. It was still hard to accept compliments. When Richard had left, he had made sure to list all her deficiencies. She was too boring, too plain, too safe. She had believed him. She had spent the first 2 months after the divorce lying on her sister's couch, convinced her life was over at 42. But then, necessity had kicked in. She needed a job. She had gone back to her roots, supply chain management. She took a mid-level job at a struggling shipping firm, Orion Logistics. She worked late. She fixed problems no one else could see. And then Orion was acquired by Pierce Global, Sebastian's conglomerate. She remembered their first meeting. She was wearing a stain-resistant blouse from Target, holding a stack of spreadsheets covered in coffee. Sebastian had walked in, surrounded by terrifying lawyers. He had asked a question about the Asian supply route that no one could answer. Soraya had answered. She hadn't just answered, she had corrected his premise. The room had gone silent. Richard would have shushed her. Richard would have told her she was embarrassing him. Sebastian had stared at her for a long moment, then smiled. "What is your name?" "Soraya Jenkins." "Ms. Jenkins," Sebastian had said. "You're the only person in this room who knows what they're talking about. Walk with me." That was 4 months ago. Now, she was the VP of Operations. And tonight felt different. "You're staring at me again," Soraya said playfully. "I can't help it," Sebastian replied. "So tell me, how does the new apartment feel? Have you settled in?" "It's quiet," Soraya said. "But a good quiet. I bought a yellow couch. Richard hated yellow. Said it was tacky. I love it." "To hell with Richard," Sebastian said casually. He didn't say it with jealousy, just a dismissal of a nuisance. If he didn't like yellow, he lacked imagination. Soraya laughed again. She felt light. Across the room, Richard was gripping his steak knife so hard his knuckles were white. "Rick, seriously, you're scaring me," Tiffany hissed. Stop staring at them. It's rude. And even if that is your ex, who cares? Look at her. She looks like she's trying too hard. She's wearing the emerald necklace, Richard murmured, ignoring Tiffany completely. What necklace? My grandmother's necklace. No. Wait. Richard squinted. No, that's not my grandmother's. That's bigger. Rick? Tiffany slammed her hand on the table. Richard snapped his head back to her. What? I'm bored, and I'm hungry, and you're obsessing over your old washed-up ex-wife. You promised me a special night. Is this special? Richard looked at Tiffany. Really looked at her. He saw the pout, the vacant eyes seeking entertainment, the complete lack of interest in anything that didn't directly benefit her. Then he looked back at Soraya. She was leaning in, listening to the man in the Savile Row suit speak. She looked intellectual. She looked dignified. She looked out of his league. A cold pit formed in Richard's stomach. Who is he? Richard asked, more to himself than Tiffany. Who is the guy? I don't know, Tiffany grumbled, cutting into her lobster. Some old guy. Probably her sugar daddy. Gross. Excuse me, Richard said, standing up abruptly. Where are you going? Tiffany screeched. Rick, I need the restroom. He lied. He didn't go to the restroom. He walked toward the bar, which gave him a better angle on the window table. He needed to see the man's face. He needed to know who had picked up the pieces of the life he had shattered. As he got closer, the man turned his head to signal the sommelier. Richard stopped dead in his tracks. The blood drained from his face, leaving him feeling lightheaded. He knew that face. Everyone in the business world knew that face. It was on the cover of Forbes last month. It was on the news every time the stock market shifted. Sebastian Pierce. The man was a billionaire, not a millionaire like Richard, who had a few million in assets and a lot of debt. Sebastian Pierce was buy a country rich. He was change the GDP of a nation rich. And he was holding Soraya's hand. Richard's mind raced. How? How did Soraya, the woman who clipped coupons for laundry detergent, meet Sebastian Pierce? He felt a sudden, violent urge to intervene. This was wrong. This was a glitch in the matrix. Soraya was the loser in the divorce. He was the winner. That was the script. If she was with a billionaire, then... What did that make him? He took a step forward, driven by a toxic mix of ego and confusion. He had to talk to her. He had to remind her of her place. He had to break the spell. But before he could take another step, he saw Sebastian reach into his inner jacket pocket. Richard's breath hitched. Sebastian pulled out a small, black velvet box. The restaurant seemed to go silent for Richard, the clinking of silverware and the murmur of conversation fading into a dull roar. He watched, paralyzed, as Sebastian Pierce, the shark of Silicon Valley, the most eligible bachelor in New York, placed the box on the table and looked Soraya Jenkins in the eyes. Richard felt a hand on his arm. It was Henri, the maître d'. Monsieur Sterling, Henri said, his voice firm but low. Please return to your seat. You are disturbing the flow of the room. That's my wife, Richard whispered, his eyes not leaving the table. That, Henri corrected icily, is Miss Jenkins, and she is the guest of Mr. Pierce. I must insist you sit down, or I will have to ask you to leave. Richard looked at Henri, then back at the table. He was impotent. He was a spectator in a game he thought he was refereeing. He turned and stumbled back to his table, where Tiffany was busy taking a selfie with her lobster. Took you long enough, she muttered. Did you see who that guy was? I think I recognized him. Shut up, Tiffany, Richard said, his voice trembling. Excuse me? Tiffany dropped her phone. Did you just tell me to shut up? I said shut up, Richard hissed, slamming his hand on the table. Tiffany's eyes went wide. She wasn't used to this. Richard was usually a doormat for her tantrums. "I think," Richard said, staring at his empty plate, "I have made a terrible mistake." At the window table, Sebastian opened the box. Soraya gasped. Inside wasn't just a ring. It was a vintage Art Deco piece, platinum with a sapphire the size of a quail's egg, surrounded by diamonds. It was classy, unique, and terrifyingly beautiful. "Soraya," Sebastian said, his voice steady, "I have spent my life building things, empires, systems, fortunes. But I realized 4 months ago that I was building them for no one. I was building a castle with no queen." Soraya's hands flew to her mouth. Tears pricked her eyes. "You challenge me," Sebastian continued. "You make me better. You see the world in a way I never could. I don't just want you by my side at board meetings. I want you by my side for everything. Every morning coffee, every stupid argument about yellow couches, every rainstorm." He slid the box across the tablecloth. "Soraya Jenkins, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Soraya stared at the ring. The sapphire caught the candlelight, fracturing it into 1,000 shades of deep blue. The world around her seemed to hold its breath. She looked up at Sebastian. His eyes were vulnerable. That was the thing that struck her most. This titan of industry, this man who moved markets with a whisper, was looking at her as if she held the power to destroy him. Soraya started, her voice trembling. In the background, Richard Sterling could no longer contain himself. The sight of the ring, a ring that clearly cost more than his entire investment portfolio, snapped the last tether of his sanity. He stood up, knocking his chair back. It hit the floor with a loud clatter. "No!" Richard shouted. The restaurant, already quiet in anticipation of the answer at the center table, went dead silent. Heads turned. Richard marched toward the center of the room. He felt like the hero in a movie, rushing to stop a tragic mistake. In his mind, Soraya was being tricked. She was a simple woman. She didn't understand the shark-infested waters of the elite. She needed him to save her. "Rick, stop!" Tiffany hissed from their table, mortified. She grabbed her purse, shielding her face. Richard ignored her. He reached the banquette just as Soraya was about to speak. "Soraya, don't," Richard said, his voice breathless and commanding. Soraya froze. She looked up, her eyes widening in shock. "Richard!" Sebastian didn't stand up. He didn't even turn his body. He simply shifted his gaze from Soraya's face to Richard's. His expression transformed from tender to terrifyingly blank. "Who is this?" Sebastian asked, his voice calm but possessing a dangerous edge. "I'm her husband," Richard declared, puffing out his chest. "Ex-husband," Soraya corrected immediately. Her voice was sharper than Richard expected. She didn't sound scared. She sounded annoyed. "Soraya, look at this," Richard said, gesturing wildly at Sebastian. "You're being played. Look at him. He's Sebastian Pierce. Do you know who he is? He eats companies for breakfast. You think he actually wants to marry you? He's probably bored. This is a game to him. You're out of your depth, Soraya. Come with me. Let's talk about this outside." He reached out to grab her arm. Before his fingers could graze her skin, Sebastian's hand shot out. He gripped Richard's wrist. It wasn't a violent jerk, but an immovable clamp. Richard tried to pull back, but he couldn't budge. "If you touch her," Sebastian said, his volume conversational but his tone lethal, "I will ensure that you never work in this hemisphere again. And I am not speaking metaphorically." Richard winced. The grip was iron. "Let go of me. I'm trying to protect her." "Protect me?" Soraya stood up slowly. She was tall in her heels, almost eye level with Richard. She smoothed the silk of her emerald dress. "Protect me from what, Richard?" From a man who respects me. From a man who listens to me. From making a fool of yourself, Richard spat, his face red. Look at you. You're playing dress-up. You belong in Queens, Soraya. You belong with the coupons and the pot roast. You can't handle this world. I'm the one who made it. I'm the one who closed the Sterling Vaughan deal today. I'm the success story. Soraya looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time in 6 months, she didn't see the man she had mourned. She saw a small, petty, insecure stranger in an expensive suit. The Sterling Vaughan deal? Soraya asked, a strange expression crossing her face. You closed it? Damn right I did, Richard sneered, trying to wrench his wrist free from Sebastian. I'm a millionaire, Soraya. I tried to tell you I was going places, but you were dragging me down. Soraya let out a short, incredulous laugh. She looked at Sebastian. Did you know? Sebastian released Richard's wrist with a shove of disgust. He picked up his napkin and dabbed his mouth. I suspected. Greg Vaughan is a sloppy negotiator. He usually needs assistance. What are you talking about? Richard demanded, rubbing his wrist. Richard, Soraya said, her voice dropping to a pitying whisper. You didn't close that deal because you're a genius. You closed it because Orion Logistics approved the supply chain integration this morning. So, Richard scoffed, Orion is just some shipping company. I am the VP of Operations at Orion, Soraya said. Richard blinked. What? I approved the deal, Soraya said. I saw the paperwork. I saw your name on it. I saw how desperate the terms were, and I signed off on it. Not because I still love you, but because I knew you needed the win to pay off your debts. I did it out of pity, Richard. The color drained from Richard's face. You work at Orion. She runs Orion, Sebastian corrected. He stood up now, towering over Richard. And she is about to run a lot more than that. Sebastian turned back to Soraya, ignoring Richard as if he were a fly. You were interrupted, my love. Soraya looked at Richard one last time. It was a look of finality, the last thread of their 15-year history severed. She turned her back on him. Yes, she said to Sebastian. Yes, I will marry you. The restaurant erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. The other diners who had watched the entire exchange were on their feet. They were cheering for the couple, but they were also cheering for the public execution of Richard's ego. Henri, the maître d'eux, appeared at Richard's elbow, flanked by 2 large security guards. Mr. Sterling, Henry said coldly, you have overstayed your welcome. And your credit card. It was declined for the deposit on the table. Something about maxed out limit. Richard looked around. The room was laughing. He saw Tiffany standing by the exit, talking to a young man in a Ferrari jacket. She wasn't even looking at him. Richard stammered. Out, Henry said. The guards grabbed Richard by the arms. He was marched through the dining room, past the cheering tables, past the woman he had thrown away, and thrown out onto the wet pavement of Manhattan. He landed on his knees in a puddle. The heavy oak doors of Le Bernardin swung shut, muting the applause inside. Richard knelt in the rain, the water soaking through his Brioni suit. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with shaking hands. It was a text from Tiffany. Don't bother coming by tonight. I'm taking an Uber to my sister's. Also, I think we should see other people. You're kind of a vibe killer. Sorry, Richard stared at the screen until the rain blurred the words. 3 weeks later, the rain had stopped, but the storm in Richard's life was just beginning. Richard sat in his office, staring at the panoramic view of the city. It was the view he had always wanted. But the office felt like a cage. The incident at Le Bernardin had made the rounds. It hadn't been on the news, Sebastian Pierce had the power to kill stories like that, but the gossip circuit was ruthless. Richard walked into rooms and conversations stopped. He wasn't the up-and-coming mogul anymore. He was the guy who yelled at Sebastian Pierce. But that wasn't the worst part. His office door opened, and Greg Vaughan walked in. Greg was Richard's partner in the new venture. He was a nervous, sweaty man who usually let Richard do the talking. Today, Greg looked pale. "Rick, we have a problem," Greg said, slamming a file onto the glass desk. "Relax, Greg," Richard said, leaning back and trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "The merger is signed. The money is flowing. What's the issue?" "The money isn't flowing, Rick. The bank froze the credit line." Richard sat up. "What?" "Why? The collateral is solid." The collateral was based on the projected revenue from the Asian distribution network, Greg said, his voice rising to a squeak. "The network that is managed by Pierce Global." Richard felt a cold sweat prickle his neck. "So, we have a contract. We have a contract that is subject to quarterly performance reviews by the parent company," Greg said. "And guess who just ordered an emergency audit of our entire operation?" Richard didn't need to guess. "They're tearing us apart, Rick," Greg said, pacing the room. "They found the discrepancies in the Q3 filing, the ones you told me to fudge until the deal closed." "Everyone fudges Q3, Richard shouted. "Not when the auditor is sent by Sebastian Pierce," Greg screamed back. "They're going to void the contract, Rick. There's a bad faith clause. If they void it, we owe the bank the full loan amount immediately. $12 million. Richard slumped back in his chair. 12 million. He didn't have 12 million. He had a leased Mercedes, a rented penthouse in Soho, and a lot of expensive suits. "It's Soraya," Richard whispered. "She's doing this." "I don't know who is doing it," Greg said, wiping his forehead. "But I know this. I'm out. I spoke to my lawyer this morning. I'm cooperating with the audit. I'm telling them everything about the cooked books." "You can't." Richard stood up. "We're partners. You go down, I go down." "You're the CEO, Rick," Greg said, looking at him with disdain. "You signed the papers. You're the one who wanted the glory. Now you get the blame." Greg turned and walked out. Richard was alone. The silence of the office was deafening. He grabbed his phone. He had to fix this. He had to talk to her. He had blocked Soraya's number the day he moved out, a final act of arrogance. He unblocked it now, his fingers trembling. He dialed. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "This is Soraya," a voice said. It was calm, professional. "Soraya, it's me," Richard said, his voice cracking. There was a pause. "Richard, I assumed you might call." "Soraya, you have to stop him," Richard pleaded. "Sebastian, he's destroying my company. He's auditing us. He's going to bankrupt me." "Sebastian doesn't micromanage audits, Richard," Soraya said coolly. "That department falls under my jurisdiction now. I ordered the audit." Richard froze. "You? Why? Out of spite? Because of what happened at dinner?" "No, Richard. Not spite," Soraya said. "Due diligence. I saw your financials when I approved the initial deal. They looked optimistic. Now that I'm stepping into a larger role at Pierce Global, I have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure our partners are solvent. Your company isn't solvent. It's a Ponzi scheme wrapped in a nice logo." "I'm your husband," Richard shouted. "Ex-husband," she corrected again. "And this is business. You always told me, Richard, it's not personal, it's just business. Remember when you cancelled our anniversary trip to go to Vegas with clients? Just business. Remember when you drained our savings to buy that car? Just business. Well, this is just business. Soraya, please," Richard begged. He hated himself for it, but he was drowning. "If this deal falls through, I lose everything. I'll be on the street." I know, Soraya said. Her voice wasn't happy. It wasn't sad. It was just factual. I suggest you sell the car, Richard, and the watch. You're going to need a good lawyer. Wait. Soraya, can we meet? Just 5 minutes. Please, for old time's sake. I need to explain. There was a long silence on the other end. Richard held his breath. Fine, Soraya said. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. My office at the Pierce Tower. You have 5 minutes. She hung up. Richard stared at the phone. He had a chance. He was charming. He was a salesman. He had sold Soraya on the idea of him 15 years ago. He could do it again. He just needed to remind her of who he was. He rushed home to his empty penthouse. He went to his closet. He bypassed the flashy suits he had bought to impress Tiffany. He went to the back and found an old navy blue suit. It was the one he wore to his mother's funeral. It was modest. He looked in the mirror. He looked tired. Good. That would help. He would play the victim. He would play the remorseful sinner. Soraya had a soft heart. That was her weakness. He would exploit it one last time. The Pierce Tower was a monolith of glass and steel that pierced the sky above Hudson Yards. It made Richard's rented office building look like a strip mall. Richard arrived at 9:45 a.m. He had to check in with security, surrender his phone, and go through a metal detector. The lobby was buzzing with people who looked smarter, richer, and more important than him. He was escorted to the 50th floor by an assistant who didn't smile. "Ms. Jenkins will see you now," the assistant said, opening a set of double oak doors. Richard walked in. The office was massive. One wall was entirely glass, overlooking the harbor. There was a seating area with the yellow couch Soraya had mentioned, a bright, defiant splash of color in the sleek room. Soraya was sitting behind a desk that looked like it was made from the wing of an airplane. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit, her hair blow-dried to perfection. She looked like a CEO. She looked like she owned the building. She didn't stand up when he entered. She just gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit," she said. Richard sat. The chair was lower than hers, a classic power move. He noted it with a grim respect. "You look good, Soraya," Richard started, using his sincere voice. "You have 4 minutes and 30 seconds, Richard," she said, glancing at a tablet on her desk. Richard cleared his throat. "Right. Look, Soraya, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. The divorce, the way I handled things, it was wrong. I was going through a midlife crisis. I was confused." "You weren't confused," Soraya said, not looking up from her screen. "You were cruel. There's a difference." "Okay, I was cruel," Richard admitted. "I'm sorry, truly. But do I deserve to be ruined? Soraya, we had 15 years together. Doesn't that mean anything?" Soraya finally looked up. Her eyes were clear, devoid of the tears he was used to seeing. "It means a lot, Richard," she said. "It means I wasted 15 years supporting a man who thought so little of me that he replaced me the second he got a bonus check. It means I cooked, cleaned, and managed your life while you told me I was boring. Do you know why I was boring? Soraya, I was boring because I was tired, Richard," she continued, her voice rising slightly. "I was tired of carrying you. I was the one who proofread your emails because your grammar is terrible. I was the one who reminded you of your clients' birthdays. I was the invisible infrastructure of your life." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "I know, I took you for granted. You didn't just take me for granted. You erased me." Soraya stood up and walked to the window. "And now, you want mercy. You want me to call off the audit. You want me to save you again." "Just this once," Richard said, standing up and walking toward her. "If you stop the audit, I can restructure. I can pay back the loan. I'll leave you alone forever. I promise." Soraya turned to face him. The sun haloed her figure. "I can't stop the audit, Richard, because the fraud isn't just in the projections." Richard stopped. "What?" "The audit uncovered the embezzlement," Soraya said quietly. The room spun. "Embezzlement? I never—" "Not you," Soraya said. "Greg. Greg has been siphoning money from the startup capital into an offshore account in the Caymans. About $4 million. Richard's mouth fell open. "Greg? No. Greg is an idiot. He doesn't know how to do that." "Greg is an idiot," Soraya agreed. "But Tiffany isn't." Richard blinked. "Tiffany? My Tiffany? She's not yours, Richard. She never was. Tiffany and Greg have been acquainted for a long time. It seems they played you perfectly. Greg needed a face for the company, someone arrogant enough to sign the papers without reading the fine print. Tiffany needed someone to fund her lifestyle until the heist was complete. Richard felt like he was going to vomit. "You're lying. You're trying to hurt me." Soraya picked up a folder from her desk and tossed it to him. It slid across the polished wood. "Photos," Soraya said. "Greg and Tiffany, Bahamas, 2 days ago. They're gone, Richard, and they left you holding the bag." Richard opened the folder. There they were. Tiffany, in a bikini he had paid for, kissing Greg Vaughan on a yacht. Richard fell back into the chair. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," Soraya said, her voice softening just a fraction. "Because you were too busy looking in the mirror to see what was happening around you. You were so obsessed with upgrading your life that you didn't realize you were the mark." Richard put his head in his hands. It was over. The loan, the fraud, the embezzlement. He was liable for all of it. He was looking at prison time. "Why are you telling me this?" Richard whispered. "Because," Soraya said, "I wanted you to know that I didn't destroy you, Richard. You destroyed yourself. I just turned on the lights." The door opened. Sebastian walked in. He looked immaculate in a grey suit. He nodded at Soraya, a look of shared understanding passing between them. "The police are in the lobby, Richard," Sebastian said. "They have a warrant for your arrest regarding the banking fraud." Richard looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Soraya, please, help me." Soraya looked at him. For a second, he saw the wife he used to know, the woman who would fix anything. But then, she looked at the yellow couch. She looked at the ring on her finger. She looked at Sebastian. "I can't help you," Soraya said. "I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. She pressed a button on her desk. "Security? Please escort Mr. Sterling out and make sure he uses the service elevator. We don't want to cause a scene in the lobby." Richard stood up. He felt hollow. He looked at Soraya one last time. She was already looking at a document Sebastian had handed her. She was working. She had moved on. As the guards took him by the arms, Richard realized the true tragedy. It wasn't that he had lost the money. It wasn't that he was going to jail. It was that Soraya didn't hate him. She didn't love him. She just didn't care. He was a line item she had finally crossed off. The holding cell at the 10th precinct smelled of stale coffee and despair. Richard sat on a metal bench, his Brioni suit wrinkled and stained. He had been there for 6 hours. They had taken his shoelaces, his belt, and his Patek Philippe watch. Without the watch, his wrist felt naked and light, a physical reminder of the weight he had lost. When his court-appointed lawyer finally arrived, it wasn't the shark he was used to. It was a tired-looking public defender named Leonard Thorne, who had mustard on his tie and a file thick with bad news. "Mr. Sterling," Thorne said, sitting down and not offering a hand. We have a problem." "I was set up," Richard said, his voice hoarse. "Greg Vaughan, Tiffany Miller. They did this. I didn't know about the Cayman accounts." "The district attorney knows about the accounts," Thorne sighed. "But here's the kicker. Greg Vaughan turned himself in an hour ago." Richard's eyes went wide. "He did? Good. Then he can tell them I'm innocent." Thorne shook his head, a pitying look on his face. "Greg cut a deal, Richard. He gave them the emails where you instructed him to do whatever it takes to get the loan approved. He claims you were the mastermind. He claims he was just following orders from his domineering CEO. "That's a lie!" Richard screamed, jumping up. "He's lying!" "Sit down," Thorne barked. "It gets worse. Tiffany Miller was arrested at JFK Airport trying to board a flight to Dubai. She had $2 million in diamonds in her luggage. She was caught?" Richard felt a grim spike of satisfaction. "Yes, and she's talking, too. She claims she was your victim. She says you coerced her into laundering the money through her consulting firm. She's playing the naive girlfriend card, and the jury is going to eat it up because you're 20 years older than her." Richard slumped against the cold cinder-block wall. They were eating him alive. The people he had chosen over Soraya, the exciting partner, the beautiful mistress, were cannibals. They were tearing strips off him to save themselves. The trial was a circus. For 3 weeks, Richard sat in the courtroom and watched his life be dissected. The prosecutors painted him as a greedy, mid-life crisis cliché who discarded his faithful wife to fund a criminal lifestyle with a younger woman. They showed photos of his leased cars. They showed the receipts for Tiffany's handbags paid for with company funds. They showed the text messages where he called Soraya dead weight. Richard couldn't look at the jury. He couldn't look at the gallery. But on the 3rd day, he felt a gaze burning into him. He turned. Soraya was there. She wasn't sitting in the front row. She was in the back, near the door. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying. She was just watching. Beside her, Sebastian Pierce sat stoically, his arm protectively resting on the back of her bench. Richard wanted to shout to her. He wanted to beg her to stand up and tell them he wasn't a criminal, just a fool. But he knew she wouldn't. She had already given her deposition. She had handed over the Orion logistics audit files. She had provided the nails for his coffin, not out of malice, but out of truth. When the verdict came down, Richard didn't cry. He was too hollow for tears. Guilty on 4 counts of bank fraud. Guilty on 2 counts of conspiracy. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Halloway, looked at Richard over her spectacles. "Mr. Sterling, your arrogance is matched only by your incompetence. You destroyed a company and attempted to defraud a major financial institution to fund a vanity project. I sentence you to 5 years in a federal correctional facility." 5 years. As the bailiff cuffed him, Richard looked back one last time. The back row was empty. Soraya and Sebastian had already left. They had a life to live. He was just a prolonged pause in their day. 3 years later. The New York winter was brutal this year. The wind coming off the East River felt like broken glass. Richard stood outside the service entrance of a mid-tier hotel in Midtown. He was smoking a cigarette, shivering in a jacket that was 2 sizes too big. He had been released early on parole for good behavior, mostly because the prison system was overcrowded and he was non-violent. He wasn't Richard Sterling, the CEO, anymore. He was Rick, the night shift dishwasher. His credit was ruined. His reputation was incinerated. He lived in a basement studio in New Jersey that smelled of mold. Tiffany was gone. She had served 6 months and was now married to a reality TV producer in LA. Greg was still in minimum security, having been caught lying about the extent of the theft. Richard flicked his cigarette butt into a puddle. It sizzled and died. "Hey, Rick!" The kitchen manager, A 20-year-old kid named Dave shouted from the door. "Break's over. We got a wedding party coming in. Need those plates scrubbed." "Coming," Richard muttered. He walked back into the steamy, noisy kitchen. The heat hit him like a wall. He put on his apron and plunged his hands into the scalding, soapy water. This was his life now, scrubbing the grease off other people's feasts. "Big fancy wedding tonight," Dave said, hauling a crate of champagne bottles. "Some billionaire type, renting out the grand ballroom at the plaza, but they're using our hotel for the overflow guests. Must be nice, huh?" "Yeah," Richard said, scrubbing a plate. "Must be." He didn't pay attention to the news anymore. It was too painful, but the break-room TV was always on. Later that night, around 2 a.m., Richard sat on a milk crate in the back alley, exhausted. He pulled out his phone, a cracked Android with a shattered screen. He opened the browser. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe it was masochism. Maybe he just needed to know. He typed in Soraya Jenkins. The search results flooded the screen, but the name had changed. Soraya Pierce, named COO of Pierce Global. Inside the wedding of the decade, Sebastian Pierce and Soraya Jenkins. Richard clicked on the video link from Entertainment Tonight. The footage was grainy on his bad screen, but the image was unmistakable. It was a garden in Tuscany. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the vineyards. There was Sebastian, looking happier than Richard had ever seen a human being look. And there was Soraya. She was wearing a dress that looked like it was woven from moonlight. She wasn't just beautiful. She was radiant. She was laughing, that deep chocolate laugh Richard used to hear over Scrabble. But now, she was laughing while holding a glass of wine that probably cost more than Richard's yearly salary. The camera zoomed in as they cut the cake. Sebastian leaned in and whispered something to her. Soraya threw her head back and smiled, and for a split second she looked directly at the camera. She looked free. Richard paused the video. He stared at the pixelated image of his ex-wife. He realized then that his greatest sin hadn't been the affair. It hadn't been the money. It was that he had looked at a diamond and convinced himself it was just a rock because he didn't know how to shine it. Sebastian didn't make Soraya a diamond. He just put her in the light. Richard turned off the phone. The screen went black, reflecting his own face, gaunt, unshaven, tired. A black limousine pulled up to the curb near the alley. The window rolled down. A driver in a cap looked out. "Excuse me, buddy," the driver called out. "You know where the VIP entrance is? I'm picking up some guests for the Pierce wedding after-party." Richard froze. The universe had a sick sense of humor. "Yeah," Richard said, his voice cracking. "Around the corner. Green awning." "Thanks," the driver said. He was about to roll up the window, but he paused. He looked at Richard. "Hey, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Richard looked at the limo. It was a Mercedes S-Class, the same model he used to drive, the same tinted windows. "No," Richard said softly. "No ghosts, just a memory." "Here," the driver said, reaching into the console. He tossed a $20 bill out the window. "Get yourself some coffee. It's cold out here." The bill landed in the slush at Richard's feet. The limo purred away, disappearing into the city lights. Richard stood there for a long time. He looked at the $20. It was a tip, a handout. He bent down, his knees cracking, and picked up the wet bill. He didn't have the pride to leave it there. He needed it for the train home. As he walked toward the subway station, the rain began to fall again. It washed over the city, cleaning the streets, washing away the dirt. But Richard knew some stains never came out. He walked down the subway stairs, the darkness swallowing him whole, while high above in a penthouse somewhere, Soraya danced in the light. Richard Sterling spent 15 years looking for something better, only to realize too late that he had abandoned the best thing that ever happened to him. He traded a partner for a parasite and a home for a hotel room. In the end, Soraya didn't need to take revenge. She simply thrived. The greatest revenge wasn't seeing him in jail, it was being so happy that she forgot he existed. Richard's story is a brutal reminder. Be careful who you discard on your way to the top, because you might just meet them again on your way down, and they won't be the ones catching you. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We post real-life drama and karma stories every single week. What do you think? Did Richard deserve his fate? Or was 5 years too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. Type Team Soraya if you believe in success as the best revenge. See you in the next video.